The morning air bit at Maya Jackson's skin as she stepped out into the world, a sharp chill slicing through the thin fabric of her faded black blazer. She pulled it tighter around her shoulders, the gray knee-length skirt swaying slightly with each determined step. In her hands, she gripped a black folder stuffed with every scrap of evidence she could muster: employment records, glowing performance reviews, character references from colleagues who'd seen her grind day after day. It wasn't much, but it was her lifeline, her shield against the storm that had blindsided her. 2 weeks ago, her landlord had slapped her with an eviction notice, curt and merciless, claiming unpaid rent she'd scrambled to cover. Then her employer at Crestview Bank called her into a sterile office, accusing her of theft, stealing money she'd never even dreamed of touching. And now, impossibly, a summons had landed in her mailbox, a plain white envelope with no return address, as if someone had tossed it there with casual cruelty. Fraud, misconduct, breach of contract. The words had seared into her mind when she'd torn it open, her heart thudding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She'd stood there in her cramped living room, staring at the official letterhead from the Superior Court of Crestview County, feeling the threads of her carefully stitched life unraveling in her trembling hands. Maya wasn't new to hardship. Born into a crumbling Chicago suburb where hope was a rare commodity, she'd clawed her way up through sheer will. The streets she'd grown up on were lined with sagging porches and broken streetlights, the air thick with the sounds of shouting and sirens. Every opportunity she'd seized, every scholarship, every late-night study session had been a battle against a world that seemed determined to keep her down. She'd earned a degree, landed a steady job at the bank, and built a life she could hold up as proof to her daughter, Brianna, that faith and grit could break the chains of circumstance. But now, as she dressed for court in the dim light of her bedroom, whispering a prayer under her breath, she felt those chains tightening again, invisible but suffocating. Her mother's voice rang in her ears, a memory from years ago. Justice don't always play fair, baby. Sometimes it's got a crooked smile. Maya had always pushed back against that cynicism, refusing to let it take root. Yet standing there, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror, she couldn't shake the dread curling in her gut. The courthouse loomed ahead as she approached, its gray stone facade cold and unyielding under a sky streaked with thin clouds. Inside, the wide halls stretched out, their scuffed floors reflecting the flicker of dying fluorescent lights. The air carried a stale whiff of burnt coffee and something sharper, fear, maybe, baked into the walls from years of trembling defendants and stern verdicts. Maya's heels clicked against the tiles, each step echoing like a countdown. She felt the weight of eyes on her as she moved. A few heads turned, some with curiosity, others with pity softening their gazes. Maybe they saw the nerves twitching in her tight jaw, or maybe it was her brown skin standing out in a place draped in stiff, outdated decorum. She clutched her folder closer, her knuckles brushing the worn edges, and slipped into the courtroom, finding a seat on a hard wooden bench. The room buzzed with restless energy, prosecutors shuffling papers, defendants whispering to attorneys, security guards barking orders in low tones. It all swirled around her, a chaotic hum bouncing off the high ceilings, and she fought to steady her breath, to anchor herself against the rising tide of panic. She was alone. No family, no friends. No one had been able to skip work to stand by her side, and her stubborn pride had kept her from begging. More than anything, she ached for Brianna, who was stuck at home with a neighbor, probably pacing the tiny apartment, her small face creased with worry. Maya's chest tightened at the thought her little girl deserved better than a mother. Dragged into this nightmare, then the heavy door creaked open, and the room snapped to attention. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, and the shuffle of feet filled the space as Judge Ronald Warwick swept in. He was a towering figure, lean and sharp-edged, his silver hair slicked back from his temples like a crown, his black robe draped over him with an air of unshakable authority. But it was his face that stopped Maya cold. As his eyes landed on her, a smirk flickered across his lips, subtle but unmistakable, like a predator sizing up its prey. She felt it like a punch, a wave of nausea rolling through her. "Be seated," the bailiff commanded, and the room settled into a tense hush, broken only by the thud of Maya's heart pounding in her ears. She gripped her folder tighter, whispering to herself, "I did nothing wrong. I'm innocent." But when her gaze met Warwick's again, that certainty wavered. His stare carried a weight arrogance, contempt, a gleam that suggested he'd already written her story before she'd uttered a word. In that moment, she wondered if justice was just a game to him, a twisted dance where power trumped truth. She'd heard whispers about men like him, perched high on their benches, wielding gavels like scepters, untouchable and unaccountable. Her mother's warning echoed louder now, and Maya's resolve hardened. She didn't know how she'd fight this net without a lawyer. Not with her bank account scraped dribbit. She wouldn't let them crush her spirit. Not yet. The bailiff's voice cut through the silence. Case number 4187. The People versus Maya Jackson. Charges, fraud, embezzlement, and breach of contract. A ripple of gasps spread through the gallery. Soft but sharp, each syllable landing on Maya like a hammer strike. She gripped the edge of the table in front of her, her knuckles paling, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Judge Warwick cleared his throat, his tone clipped. "Miss Jackson, how do you plead?" She rose, legs trembling beneath her, and forced the words out. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her voice quavered, but she held her head high. A faint twitch of amusement crossed Warwick's face, his lips curling ever so slightly. "Very well," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's proceed with the preliminary hearing." Assistant District Attorney Jacob Rowan stepped forward, a man Maya recognized from the local news harp suit, sharper tongue, a bulldog with a reputation for chewing up defendants and spitting out convictions. His dark hair was neatly combed, his posture rigid with confidence as he flipped open a file and began. According to the allegations, Maya Jackson intentionally manipulated financial records at Crestview Bank, siphoning funds from client accounts over a 6-month period. The total amount exceeds $85,000. Maya's stomach flipped, bile rising in her throat. It was a leavery word of it. She'd never seen those accounts, never touched a dime that wasn't hers. Rowan's voice boomed on, relentless. "Furthermore, Miss Jackson entered a contractual agreement with the bank to uphold the highest standards of integrity. By violating that trust, she breached her contract and betrayed her employer." He snapped the file shut with a flourish, casting her a glance dripping with disdain. Maya sank back into her seat, her mind spinning. Who had spun this web? Why her? She'd been a model employerly mornings, late nights, no complaints, no scandals. Warwick's gaze flit to her, icy and piercing. "Miss Jackson, you may speak in your defense. I see you have no representation, is that correct?" She swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, Your Honor. I can't afford an attorney right now." His smirk returned, sharper this time, as if her vulnerability amused him. "You do realize this is a serious matter, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steadier now. He waved a hand at the folder in her lap. "What evidence do you have to refute the prosecution's claims?" Her hands shook as she lifted the folder, spreading its contents across the table pages of proof. Her life reduced to ink and paper. "I have my employment records, performance reports, and references. I also have documentation showing that on the dates in question, I was assigned to unrelated tasks. I never had access to those accounts, never had clearance to touch them." Her voice grew firmer as she spoke, fueled by a flicker of defiance. Warwick leaned back, tapping a pen against the bench with a rhythmic click, click, click. "Is that all?" he asked, his tone flat, dismissive. She felt her throat tighten. "For now, yes, Your Honor." Rowan smirked, stepping forward again. "Your Honor, I request that Miss Jackson be taken into custody or placed under strict supervision. We have reason to believe she's a flight risk." Maya's breath caught, a gasp slipping out. A flight risk? She had a daughter, a home shattered as it was roots that tied her to this place. She had nowhere to run, no money to flee with. But Warwick's lips twitched again, that same cruel amusement glinting in his eyes. "All right," he said, peering down at her. "Bail is set at $50,000. The room fell silent, the number hanging in the air like a guillotine. Maya's heart sank. She couldn't scrape together $500, let alone that fortune. She'd be stuck in a cell or tangled in a bail bondsman's grip, her freedom a distant dream. As the hearing wrapped, court officers moved toward her, their boots thudding against the floor. She caught a glimpse of Rowan chuckling with Warwick, their voices a low hum laced with smug satisfaction. The judge's smirk lingered in her vision as a guard nudged her toward the corridor, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. The holding area was a blurkled metal benches, the clank of handcuffs, the murmur of other detainees. Maya's mind raced, replaying every moment at Crestview Bank. She'd been meticulous, dependable, a quiet cog in the machine. So why this? Why her? The charges, the bail, the sneers, it all reeked of something rotten, something orchestrated beyond her reach. Unbeknownst to her, the truth was already stirring. Far from that courtroom, FBI agents were sifting through files, tracing threads of corruption that stretched from Crestview's elite to the judge's bench. Warwick's smirk, Rowan's aggression were pawns in a larger game, one that thrived on crushing the powerless to protect the privileged. Maya didn't know it yet, but the seeds of her vindication had been planted, ready to bloom and topple the corrupt from their thrones. For now, though, she sat in the dim light of a holding cell, her folder clutched to her chest, vowing to fight with every ounce of strength she had left. Justice might wear a twisted grin, but she'd make it face her, and she'd teach it the cost of abusing power. Maya Jackson's life was anything but extravagant, a fact made painfully clear by the sight of her weathered old Honda, its chipped paint and rattling engine a quiet testament to her modest circumstances. Yet here she was, ensnared in a vicious accusation that threatened to unravel the fragile threads of her existence. Who could have orchestrated such a cruel lie? The question gnawed at her as she was ushered into a small, sterile room at the Crestview County Detention Center. The walls were a sickly pale shade, and the flickering fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like a swarm of restless insects, casting harsh, unsteady shadows across the linoleum floor. An officer stood before her, his expression blank as he began the intake process, fingerprints pressed onto a cold scanner, a mugshot taken under the unforgiving glare of a camera. Each step felt like a punch to her gut, the humiliation sinking deeper into her bones. She wasn't a criminal, yet the weight of the moment made her feel like one. Still, for the sake of her daughter, Brianna, Maya squared her shoulders and lifted her chin, refusing to let despair swallow her whole. This nightmare wasn't over, not by a long shot. As she sat waiting, her ears caught snippets of conversation drifting from two guards stationed near the door. Their voices were low, casual, but one of them let slip a remark that sliced through the haze of her exhaustion. Something about Judge Warwick and his infamous after-hours parties. The other guard chuckled, a sharp, bitter sound that sent a shiver down Maya's spine. She tried to tune them out, to focus on the cold metal bench beneath her, but the mention of Warwick's name lingered like a dark cloud. The guards hushed their tones before she could catch more, their words dissolving into murmurs. In that fleeting moment, a fire sparked within her, a fierce, unyielding resolve. If Judge Warwick was corrupt, if the prosecutor was complicit, or if someone at the bank had framed her, she wouldn't rest until she dragged the truth into the light. The odds were stacked against her, a single mother with no wealth or influence, but she clung to the hope that determination alone might be enough. Little did she know, her quiet vow was about to intersect with forces far beyond her imagining. Night descended as the intake process dragged on, and Maya was finally led to a cramped cell. The cot they gave her was stiff and narrow, barely wide enough to hold her frame, and the thin blanket offered little comfort against the chill seeping through the concrete walls. The fluorescent lights above never dimmed, their relentless hum drilling into her skull and denying her even a moment of peace. Her chest tightened with an ache that went beyond exhaustion's thought of Brianna, her little girl with the wide, trusting eyes, alone tonight without her mother's arms to hold her. What if Brianna woke up in the dark, her small voice calling out for comfort that wouldn't come? Maya swallowed the lump in her throat, blinking back tears that threatened to spill over. She whispered to herself that this was temporary, a mantra to keep the panic at bay. It had to be temporary. Across town, in a sleek, high-rise office perched atop the Crestview Bank building, Harold Whitcomb sat behind an imposing mahogany desk. The regional director of the bank, Harold was a man of sharp suits and sharper ambition, though his polished exterior hid a growing unease. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, its hands gleaming faintly in the dim glow of his desk lamp. Yet his brow remained creased with tension. He tapped a fountain pen rhythmically against a stack of papers. each tap a small release of the agitation simmering beneath his calm facade. Opposite him sat Kevin Mackenzie, a board member whose slick demeanor matched the tailored cut of his jacket. Kevin flipped through a folder, pausing to study a photograph of Maya clipped to the inner flap. The allegations against her were laid out in crisp, clinical detail embezzlement. A crime so neatly packaged it might as well have been gift-wrapped by the prosecutor himself. "You're certain this is airtight?" Kevin asked, his voice edged with impatience as he leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other. Harold drew a slow breath, his lips tightening. "As long as Judge Warwick and Rowan play their parts, Maya Jackson will take the fall. She doesn't have the money or the connections to fight back. And if she tries, he let the sentence hang, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. Well, we have ways of handling that." Kevin's eyes narrowed, skepticism flickering in his gaze. "I don't know, Harold. The timeline's sloppy, and Maya, she's not the type. Her performance reviews are spotless years of glowing praise, no hint of trouble. This doesn't add up." Harold shrugged, a casual gesture that belied the stakes. "That's exactly why she's perfect. Everyone will be stunned. Maya Jackson, a thief. The shock will fade once the gavel falls, and by then, no one will bother tracing the missing funds to their real destination." His eyes darted to the corner of the room, where a security camera blinked its tiny red light. Better to keep things vague, he reminded himself, his fingers tightening around the pen. A heavy silence settled between them. Kevin snapped the folder shut, his jaw tight. "Fine, I'll trust you on this. But if it blows up, Harold, it's your head on the chopping block. I won't let the bank go down in flames over some scapegoat you picked." The word frame hung in the air, blunt and unapologetic. Harold gave a curt nod, unfazed. If Maya was too trusting, too blind to see the trap closing around her, that was her own fault. Justice, after all, was a game for those who could afford to play it. Later that night, as Maya drifted in and out of a restless sleep, a different scene unfolded miles away. In a modest apartment cluttered with books and takeout containers, Special Agent David Chan paced the worn carpet of his living room, a slender man with wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. Chan was no high-flying FBI hotshot, just a diligent operative stationed at the Chicago field office, driven by a stubborn hunch. His laptop glowed on the coffee table, casting a blue sheen across his face as he scrolled through encrypted files. For months, he'd been chasing whispers of financial irregularities and unsensile sums vanishing from local corporations, including Crestview Bank. A whistleblower had slipped him a tip about suspicious transactions, and now Maya Jackson's name had surfaced, flashing like a neon sign in a storm. The details didn't sit right. A single mother with an impeccable record, new to the city, known for her quiet integrity, suddenly accused of masterminding a sophisticated fraud. It reeked of a setup. Chen clicked through her file, noting the absence of red flags, no debts, no scandals. Just a woman trying to build a life for herself and her daughter. His gut churned with suspicion. This wasn't a lone employee gone rogue. It was a chess move in a bigger game. A text buzzed on his phone, anonymous, but familiar, one of his courthouse contacts. "Heard Maya Jackson was processed tonight. No bail yet. She's stuck in a cell." Chan's jaw tightened. Judge Warwick's name kept circling back, a recurring shadow in cases like this. Warwick had a reputation for rulings that tilted suspiciously when the accused were poor, powerless, or people of color. Chen scribbled in his leather-bound journal, "Maya Jackson suspect or scapegoat? Possible collusion, Crestview Bank, Warwick, Ada Rowan, dig deeper." Unbeknownst to Maya, the wheels of justice, so ever slow and rusted, were beginning to turn in her favor. The FBI wasn't a flawless machine, but agents like Chan still existed, lone figures who noticed the cracks others ignored, who cared enough to challenge the system's complacency. Soon, he'd take his findings up the chain, and Maya's name would land on a desk that mattered. For now, though, she lay awake in her cell, staring at the cracked ceiling as the fluorescent buzz drilled into her thoughts. How had she ended up here, so isolated, so helpless? Brianna's face flashed in her mind, toes bright, unwavering eyes, that innocent belief in her mother's strength. It was enough to keep her going. She whispered a prayer into the stillness, a vow to clear her name. though she couldn't yet fathom the depth of the corruption she faced, or the danger lurking in the shadows. Judge Warwick wasn't just a cog in this machine, it was a cornerstone. His smug grin a fixture at Crestview's elite gatherings, his influence woven into the town's old boy network. To take him on was to challenge a system built to shield men like him. A lesson in justice's cruel irony. Power protects its own, while the powerless pay the price. Yet fate was threading a different story, one Maya couldn't see. In mere days, a spark of hope would emerge from an unlikely corner, its ripples stretching all the way to the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. The next morning, Maya shuffled back into the courtroom, her clothes rumpled, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. She'd scraped together a deal with a bail bondsman overnight alone. That would haunt her finances for years, but worth it to hold Brianna again. She stood as tall as her weary body allowed, facing Judge Warwick's icy stare. He asked if she'd secured counsel, his tone dripping with condescension. She nodded, though her savings were a pitiful shield against the legal storm ahead. Warwick set the trial for 3 weeks out a breakneck pace for a fraud case. When months were the norm, the speed fueled her dread. He wanted her buried before she could fight back. As she stepped into the courthouse hallway, a voice stopped her. "Miss Jackson." "Wait." Maya turned, wary to see a petite woman with curly brown hair and piercing green eyes. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, a stack of papers cradled in her arms. Rebecca Murphy, investigative journalist with the Crestview Times. "I've been tracking your case." She held out a business card, her gaze steady and earnest. In a hushed tone, Rebecca Murphy cast a quick, cautious glance round the dimly lit street, her voice barely above a whisper as she leaned toward Maya Jackson. The air felt thick with secrets, and something about the situation gnawed at her details that didn't quite align. Pieces of a puzzle refusing to fit. "It doesn't add up," she murmured, her brow furrowing with quiet intensity. "Would you be willing to sit down with me, just to talk?" Maya froze, her fingers tightening around the edge of Rebecca's business card. The press had always made her uneasy, those bold, screaming headlines that twisted truth into something unrecognizable. Yet there was an unmistakable warmth in Rebecca's voice, a sincerity that reached deep into Maya's gut, stirring her instincts. She was drowning, desperate for a lifeline. And here was Somi Anyafaring to help illuminate the shadows closing in around her. "Yes," she said at last, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll talk to you." "Thank you." Relief flooded Rebecca's features, softening the sharp edges of her determined expression. "I'll text you to set something up," she promised. "You're not in this alone, Maya." Tears pricked at Maya's eyes, hot and sudden. She pressed her lips together, gave a small nod, and turned away, her heart a tangled mess of gratitude and fear. By late afternoon, Maya stepped into the familiar sanctuary of her modest apartment. The faint hum of the refrigerator greeted her as she pushed the door open. And there, at the kitchen table, sat her daughter Brianna, a riot of crayons scattered before her. The neighbor, a kind-eyed woman with graying hair, looked up from her knitting and offered a gentle smile before slipping out quietly. The second Brianna's wide, curious eyes landed on her mother. She sprang from her chair, her small feet pattering across the linoleum. She flung her arms around Maya's waist with the fierce, unreserved love only a child could muster. Maya dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter close, burying her face in the little girl's hair. The sweet, sticky scent of bubblegum shampoo filled her lungs, and for a fleeting moment, the crushing weight of her world lifted. She was home, however fragile that refuge might be. "How was your night, Mommy?" Brianna asked, her voice bright and lilting, her braids swaying as she tilted her head. Maya's hand moved instinctively, smoothing back the soft strands with a tenderness that belied the storm raging inside her. "It was fine, sweet girl," she said, forcing a smile. "I missed you so much, for those precious seconds." She let herself sink into the comfort of her daughter's presence, pushing aside the suffocating darkness of the case that loomed over her like a guillotine. But reality was relentless. Jobless, with no income to cushion the fall, legal fees piled up in her mind like unpaid bills, and the specter of prison along. Unjust sentence haunted her every thought if she couldn't prove her innocence. That evening, Maya met Rebecca Murphy in a quiet corner of a local cafe, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the lighting dim enough to cloak their conversation in privacy. The wooden table between them was scratched and worn, a silent witness to countless untold stories. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she spoke, unraveling the nightmare that had upended her life, suspicious charges pinned on her like a scarlet letter. The judge's smug smirk as he'd set an impossibly high bail. The way her once stable existence had crumbled overnight. Rebecca listened, her pen scratching furiously across her notepad, her sharp eyes never leaving Maya's face. When Maya finally fell silent, exhausted from reliving it all, Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her expression hardening. "I've heard whispers about Judge Warwick," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "He's got a reputation, quite campaign contributions from deep-pocketed donors, real estate tycoons, bankers, the usual suspects. In return, he hands them rulings that keep their empires intact. I've chased the story before, but he's slippery connected. Every time I got close, my leads vanished." Maya's pulse surged, a frantic rhythm pounding in her chest. "So you think the bank's involved? Some kind of deal with Warwick?" Rebecca tapped her pen against the table, her mind clearly racing. If the bank's brass needed a fall guy for missing money something, to keep the spotlight off their own dirty hands, I'd be perfect. Maya, a low-level worker, no one to fight for you. And if Warwick's in their pocket, he'd bury your side of the story without blinking. Maya's throat constricted, her voice barely a rasp. "That can't be legal." "Can we prove it?" Rebecca's gaze sharpened. "That's what I'm after. If I dig up solid evidence, I'll print it. People deserve to know." They swapped numbers, and as Maya clutched that scrap of hope, she felt the danger crackling in the air. If powerful men were pulling these strings, they wouldn't hesitate to crush a nosy reporter or anyone else who got in their way. But she couldn't retreat. Brianna's future, her own freedom, it all hung in the balance. Unseen across the street, a figure lingered in the shadows, shrouded in a dark hoodie. The long lens of a camera glinted faintly as it captured every moment of their meeting. Maya's shoulders slumped, the determined tilt of Rebecca's head. As the two women parted ways, the figure slipped a phone from their pocket. Thumbs flying over the screen, a message pinged into the ether. Photos attached, subject, meeting with local reporter. Need instructions. The night swallowed them up, oblivious to the gears turning in the background. The next morning, Maya's inbox chimed with a cryptic email from an anonymous sender claiming to be a friend in the justice system. The words stared back at her. "I believe you're innocent. Don't trust anyone in that courthouse. Document every word, every move. The truth will surface if you hold on." Her heart thudded as she read it twice, dread and hope warring in her chest. Who was this? A genuine ally or a cleverly baited trap? She had no answers, only the gnawing uncertainty that had become her constant companion. Meanwhile, miles away in the FBI's Chicago field office, Special Agent David Chan hunched over a cluttered desk, his eyes bloodshot from hours of poring over Crestview Bank's financial records. He traced $85,000 in sly, incremental transfers, money that slithered through shell accounts and bounced across platforms like a ghost. One name flickered in the haze: Harold Whitcomb, a shadowy figure tied to the bank's upper echelon. The red flags were glaring now, impossible to ignore. Chan's fingers flew across his keyboard, drafting a detailed request to escalate the case, laying out how Maya Jackson was likely a pawn in a sprawling embezzlement scheme. By day's end, his boss, Supervisory Special Agent Alicia Grant, summoned him. She held up his report, her expression unreadable. "You've got my attention, Chan," she said, her voice crisp. "Embezzlement, a corrupt judge, maybe a cover-up at the top. You sure about this?" Chan swallowed hard, nodding. "It's solidifying, but I need time, resources. Maya's trial is in 3 weeks. If we don't move fast, she's Donnie and we lose the shot to dismantle this network." Grant's lips pressed into a thin line as she scanned the data. "Fine, I'll greenlight it. Dig deeper, but watch your back. If Warwick's as big as you think, he won't take kindly to us sniffing around." Chen left her office, relief and tension coiling tight in his stomach. The noose around Maya was tightening, but she didn't yet grasp the full scope of the forces arrayed against her. With the FBI stirring, though, an unseen shield was forming, that might just save her and crack this conspiracy wide open. For the next week, Maya threw herself into her defense with a ferocity born of desperation. She haunted the public library, hauling home armloads of law textbooks, their pages dog-eared and scribbled with notes. She dissected Crestview Bank's code of conduct, mapped out her daily routines, and aligned them against the fraudulent transaction something to prove she'd been a cog, not a culprit. She fired off updates to Rebecca, who prowled the bank's tangled records like a bloodhound. The grind wore Maya thin. Some nights, despair crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was up against titansmen with money and influence she could scarcely fathom. Yet Brianna's laughter, her tiny hand slipping into Maya's at bedtime, fueled her resolve. After tucking her daughter in, Maya would sit in the quiet, rereading that mysterious email. Its vague promise that someone out there believed her clung to her like a lifeline. One afternoon, as Maya stacked her growing pile of documents on the kitchen table, the doorbell jolted her from her thoughts. Wary, she crept to the peephole. A slender man in a crisp suit stood in the hallway, glancing at a folder in his hand. Her pulse said she didn't know him, but a hazy memory of her rest flickered. Had one of the officers worn a suit like that? She cracked the door. Yes, the man's voice was calm, almost kind. "Miss Jackson, I'm David Chan, FBI." He flashed a badge, and Maya's breath hitched. Fear flared down to the rest, but then she remembered the email's hint about the FBI. Hesitant, she let him in. Chan's gaze swept the small living room, lingering on Brianna's toys scattered across the floor. He offered a polite smile. "Are you alone?" Maya nodded. "Brianna's at school." She was glad for that. Her daughter didn't need to see this. Chan settled onto the couch, his posture relaxed but deliberate. "Your case landed on my desk," he said. "I think there's enough here to suggest you're being framed." Maya's breath caught, a sob nearly escaping. "Framed? You can help me." Chan's tone stayed measured. "We're trying. No guarantees yet, but my team's investigating Judge Warwick and some players at Crestview Bank. We suspect you were set up to take the fall for a big embezzlement operation." Tears welled up, relief crashing through her. "I don't know how to thank you. No one believes me, and I can't afford a lawyer to fight this." Chan's eyes softened with understanding. "You'll still have to face court, but if we nail this evidence, we could unravel it. Almabe, get your charges dropped, and see the real culprits indicted." Hope surged in Maya's chest, fragile but fierce, though she tempered it with caution. The encounter with Chan lingered in her mind, a beacon amid the storm. Justice, she realized, wasn't just a distant ideal, it was a battle, one she was now fighting alongside unlikely allies. The lesson sank deep. Power could corrupt, could crush the innocent under its heel. But its consequences rippled outward, exposing cracks that others could pry open. Across the city, the hooded figure, Rebecca's digging, and Chan's investigation wove a web tightening around Warwick and his cronies. Maya didn't know it yet, but the truth was clawing its way to the surface, and with it, the chance to reclaim her life. Maya sat in the dim glow of her living room, the weight of the past few months pressing against her chest like a stone she couldn't shift. Her fingers trembled slightly as she handed over a thick, weathered folder to Agent David Chan, the man who now represented her fragile lifeline to freedom. She took a deep breath, her voice steady, but laced with the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting alone for too long. "This is everything I've got," she said, her dark eyes meeting his with a flicker of desperate hope. "Emails, memos, bank transaction records, even some personal notes I scribbled late at night when I couldn't sleep. Anything that might prove I didn't do this, or at least show that someone else did." She paused, her lips tightening as she added, "Please, just be careful. If they catch wind of the FBI digging around, they won't hesitate to come after me or worse." Her words hung heavy in the air, a quiet plea wrapped in fear. Chan, a weary man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that seemed unshakable, took the folder with a nod. He flipped through the pages slowly, his brow furrowing as he absorbed the messy trail of evidence Maya had painstakingly gathered. Every so often, he scratched a quick note on a small pad, his pen moving with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times before. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the faint rustle of paper and the distant hum of traffic. outside her modest apartment. Finally, he looked up, his voice low but firm. "Your trial's into weeks, Maya. We're pushing as hard as we can. But you know how it goes, the FBI's gears grind slow. I'll do everything in my power to speed this up. I promise you that." Maya nodded, her throat tight with gratitude she couldn't fully express. "Thank you, Agent Chan," she whispered, her voice cracking just enough to betray the storm of emotions churning inside her. "I don't even know how to tell you what this means to me." He offered her a small, genuine smilione that carried a flicker of warmth amid the cold machinery of justice. "Hang in there," he said simply. "We'll be in touch soon." And with that, he was gone, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts. She sank onto the sagging couch, her body folding into itself as a cautious wave of optimism washed over her. Tentative but real. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a world where the truth might actually break through the suffocating web of lies that had ensnared her. Could it be possible? Could justice, that elusive, towering ideal she'd almost given up on, finally tip the scales in her favor? The thought sparked something deep within her, a renewed fire, not just to clear her name, but to see the real culprits stripped bare, their masks of power torn away for all to see. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as she vowed to fight harder than ever. Meanwhile, across town, a very different scene unfolded in the shadowed elegance of the Crestview Country Club. Judge Warwick sat in a plush leather chair in a private room, the faint clink of ice against glass punctuating the air as he sipped his scotch. His weathered face, etched with years of authority, remained composed, though his eyes glinted with a steely resolve. Opposite him, Harold Whitcomb paced like a caged animal, his polished shoes scuffing the hardwood floor. The banker's broad shoulders were tense, his usually impeccable suit slightly rumpled as agitation seeped through his every move. "We've got a problem," Harold growled, his voice rough with barely contained panic. Words getting around that the FBI's sniffing too close. "Some agent named Chan's Involvador guy at the courthouse tipped me off." Warwick set his glass down with deliberate calm, the sound sharp against the tension filling the room. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching faintly as he processed the news. "If the FBI's in play," he said, his tone low and dangerous, "we need to move faster. Maya's trial date is locked in. I'll make sure it's quick jury stacked, proceedings airtight. She won't have a second to dig up anything that could save her." Harold stopped pacing, his breath escaping in a harsh exhale. "That's not enough, Warwick. If the feds start poking into the bank records and tie me to those missing funds, I'm done. Finished." The judge's eyes flashed with a mix of disdain and cold calculation. "Then let me handle it," he snapped. "Tell your people to keep their mouths shut and your paperwork buried deep. We'll drown Maya in so much legal muck she'll choke on it. By the time the FBI catches up, the gavel will have fallen, and this will be over." Their conversation dipped into hushed, sinister specifics plans to rig the game so thoroughly that Maya's fate would be sealed before she even stepped into the courtroom. They parted with a handshake, firm and unyielding, each man acutely aware that the stakes had just skyrocketed. For them, power wasn't just a privilege, it was a weapon, and they wielded it with ruthless precision. Far from the smoky haze of the country club, in the sterile halls of the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C., Supervisory Special Agent Alicia Grant sat at her desk, her sharp gaze skimming Chan's latest report. The evidence he'd compiled wasn't just a threat, it was a rope, thick and damning, pointing not only to Judge Warwick, but to a sprawling network of corruption that had festered in Crestview County for years. Local officials, bankers, courthouse insiders all tangled in a web of greed and abuse that made her stomach turn. This wasn't a simple case, it was a beast, one that would demand meticulous surveillance, delicate infiltration, and nerves of steel. She typed a quick email to Chan, her fingers flying over the keys. "Proceed with caution. We've got your back. Let's light up Crestview." The wheels of justice, sluggish as they often were, had begun to turn, grinding toward a reckoning no one could stop. Back in Crestview, tension coiled through the county like a living thing as Maya's trial loomed closer. Whispers of FBI involvement rippled through the courthouse, spreading unease among the staff, prosecutors, and deputies who milled about the marble corridors. Judge Warwick carried on as if nothing had changed, his robes swishing with practiced authority. But those who knew him well caught the subtle signs of tightness around his mouth, the faint shadow of worry lurking behind his polished arrogance. He was a man accustomed to bending the world to his will, but now, for the first time, he felt the ground shifting beneath him. At her small apartment, Maya stood over the stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce as the rich aroma filled the air. Her daughter, Brianna, sat at the kitchen table, her bright voice bubbling over with tales of schoolyard adventures. The 9-year-old's innocence was a shield, a fragile bubble keeping her blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their door. Maya clung to that innocence like a lifeline, her heart aching with the need to protect it. When her phone buzzed on the counter, she nearly dropped the spoon, her pulse quickening as she saw an unknown number flash on the screen. With a shaky breath, she answered. "Miss Jackson," came a low, cautious voice. "Rebecca Murphy here." Maya's grip tightened on the phone. "Rebecca, hi," she said, her mind racing. The reporter's next words hit her like a jolt. "I wanted to give you a heads up. I found a junior employee at Crestview Bank who says Harold Whitcomb personally doctored the internal logs to pin the missing funds on you." Maya's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. That's the proof we need, isn't it?" she stammered, hope surging through her. Rebecca's tone stayed measured. "It could be, but they're scared, terrified. Really. They're afraid of losing their job. Maybe worse. I'm working on getting them to go on record. But it's a tough sell." Maya exhaled slowly, her mind spinning. "Tell them they can talk to Agent Chan at the FBI. He's already digging into this. If they've got evidence, he can protect them." Rebecca hesitated. "I suggested that, but they want to stay anonymous. They mentioned Warwick said he crushes anyone who gets in his way." A chill slithered up Maya's spine, the fear all too familiar. "Keep me posted, okay?" she said softly. "Absolutely," Rebecca replied. "Stay safe." The call ended, and Maya stared at the phone, her heart pounding. Someone out there held the key to her freedom, a frightened soul teetering on the edge of courage. If they stepped forward, her trial could ignite a firestorm, exposing the rot at Crestview's core. Later that night, Maya slipped into Brianna's room, the soft glow of a nightlight casting gentle shadows across the walls. The girl slept soundly, her small arms wrapped around a worn teddy bear. "It's formatted from years of love." Maya's chest tightened, a fierce protectiveness swelling within her. If she lost this fight, Warwick and Whitcomb succeeded in burying her, what would happen to Brianna? The thought was a dagger, twisting deep. She couldn't let it happen. She wouldn't. Quietly, she stepped back, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. She'd fight with everything she had, not just for herself, but for the little girl dreaming in the next room. The next morning brought an unexpected knock at her door. Maya opened it to find an older woman standing there, her brown eyes warm and steady, her navy suit crisp against the gray March light. "Miss Jackson," the woman said with a kind smile, "I'm Celeste Evans, an attorney with a local legal aid group. One of our donors heard about your case and insisted we take it on pro bono." Maya blinked, stunned. "Why would they? I'm so grateful." "But why?" Celeste's smile widened. "Sometimes people just want to do what's right, even from the shadows. If you'll let me, I'd like to represent you at trial." Relief crashed over Maya like a tidal wave. "Yes," she breathed. "Of course. Thank you, Miss Evans, thank you." They spent hours at the kitchen table, papers spread out like a battlefield map. Celeste's questions were sharp, her mind a steel trap as she dissected every piece of evidence Maya had gathered. She scribbled notes, poked holes in the prosecution's flimsy narrative, and built a defense with the precision of an architect. Maya watched in awe, a spark of real hope igniting within her. For the first time, she felt like she might actually stand a chance. Across town, Harold Whitcomb stormed into a cramped back office at Crestview Bank, the door slamming shut with a bang that made the walls shudder. Dennis, a junior clerk with nervous hands and a pale face, flinched as Harold loomed over him. "I know you've been talking to that reporter," Harold snarled, jabbing a thick finger into Dennis's chest. "You think you're some kind of savior. Let me make this clear on word from me, and your life here is over. Done, you get that?" Dennis stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Don't know what you're talking about, he managed, his voice trembling. Harold's lip curled. Don't play dumb. Keep quiet about those logs, or I'll make you regret it. He stormed out, leaving Dennis slumped in his chair, his phone shaking in his hands as guilt and terror tore him apart. He knew Maya was innocent. He had the proof, but the cost of speaking up felt like a noose tightening around his neck. That same day, Agent Chan sat across from Alicia Grant in her D.C. office, briefing her on the latest developments. Maya's got a new lawyer now, he said, leaning back in his chair. Some anonymous donor set it up. Grant raised an eyebrow, flipping through a file. You're doing? Chen shook his head. Nope. Probably someone local who's had enough of the injustice. Grant tapped her pen against the desk, her mind racing. We've got enough here to dig deeper circumstantial, sure, but it's piling up. Warwick, Whitcomb, the whole rotten crew. Let's keep the pressure on. In Crestview, the air grew thick with anticipation as the trial neared. Maya's fight was no longer just her own, it was a beacon, drawing allies from the shadows and exposing the fragility of corrupt men who'd abused their power for too long. Justice, slow and imperfect, was stirring awake, and with it came the unshakable truth. Those who wield authority as a weapon must one day face its consequences. For Maya, for Dennis, for every soul caught in the crossfire. The reckoning was coming, and it would not be denied. The air in the newsroom buzzed with a restless energy as Harold Whitcomb leaned over his desk, his brow furrowed in frustration. We've got Whisper's unconfirmed reports teeing Judge Warwick to a secret fund bankrolled by some shady bank executives, he muttered, his voice low but sharp with urgency. But Whispers won't cut it. We need something solid: ledger entries, bank statements, a witness who's willing to swear to it under oath. His fingers drummed against the wood, betraying the storm of determination brewing inside him. This wasn't just a story to him anymore. It was a chance to topple a tower of corruption that had loomed over too many lives for too long. Across the room, Agent Chan nodded, her dark eyes glinting with resolve. I'm on it, she said, her tone steady despite the weight of the task. The trial's in 7 days. If Maya has to stand before that judge with nothing but circumstantial scraps in her favor, she's as good as finished. But if we can crack this open before he slams that gavel, Warwick won't even get the chance to bury her. Her mind raced as she spoke, already mapping out the steps of every lead she'd chase, every file she'd dig through. Maya's future teetered on a knife's edge, and Chan felt the pressure like a physical ache in her chest. It wasn't just about Maya, though. The rumors about Warwick stretched back year, stories of innocent people railroaded, their lives shattered by his prejudice and dirty deals. This was the FBI's shot to end it, and Chan wasn't about to let it slip away. Grant, her supervisor, let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his graying hair. Time's working against us, Chan. Get what we need fast. I'll push it up the chain as hard as I can. His voice carried the weariness of a man who'd fought too many battles against a broken system, but beneath it flickered a spark of hope. He believed in Chan, in the mission. As she turned to leave, a surge of urgency pulsed through her veins. She pictured Miasmal, determined Maya, caught in a web she didn't weave, and then the others, the faceless victims who'd come before her. Warwick's reign had to end, and Chan swore she'd be the one to drive the stake through its heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the city, Maya sat hunched at her kitchen table, surrounded by a fortress of papers. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through documents, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and defiance. Across from her sat Celeste Evans, her attorney, a woman whose calm demeanor masked a fierce tenacity. They'd been at it for hours, rehearsing Maya's testimony, running through every curveball the prosecutor might lob her way. Celeste's voice was firm but kind as she coached. Keep your cool, Maya. The jury's going to read your face as much as they listen to your words. They need to see strength, not doubt. Maya paused, her pen hovering over a scribbled note. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. Celeste, do you believe me, that I'm innocent? The question hung in the air, fragile and raw, a glimpse into the gnawing insecurity that kept her awake at night. Celeste set her pen down deliberately, her steady gaze locking with Maya's. Yes, Maya, I do, she said, her words carrying the weight of conviction. If I didn't, I wouldn't be sitting here, fighting for you. You've got a solid case. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make them see it. A lump rose in Maya's throat, and she managed a faint, grateful smile. Thank you, she murmured, her chest tightening with a flood of relief and vulnerability. I don't think I can face this alone. Celeste reached out, resting a reassuring hand on Maya's forearm. You're not alone anymore, she said softly. We're in this together, and we'll see it through. That promise lit a fire in Maya's battered spirit. The forces of corruption she was up against were towering, relentless, but now she had Celeste, a journalist like Harold digging for the truth, and an FBI agent like Chan working tirelessly in the shadows. The day of reckoning was barreling toward her, and Maya resolved to meet it with her head held high. She couldn't predict every twist of fate, but she was about to learn just how mighty the truth could be when brave souls rallied to wield it. When the trial day arrived, dawn broke with a crisp, unforgiving clarity. Maya stood before her bedroom mirror, smoothing the faint creases from her best blousey, a simple white top that felt like armor. Against the chaos ahead, she pulled her hair back into a tight, neat bun, her hands shaking as she pinned it in place. The reflection staring back at her was pale but resolute. This is it, she whispered to herself, her breath catching. My chance to take my life back. The weight of anticipation pressed down on her, heavy and unyielding, but she squared her shoulders and stepped into the unknown. Celeste arrived moments later, her car idling outside. She ushered Maya in with a quiet, "You've got this," and they drove to the courthouse in a thick, tense silence. Maya's fingers clutched a slim folder of Nadishir Lifeline. Though she harbored no illusions about her own power in that courtroom, everything rested on Celeste's skill, on the slim hope that Chan or Harold might unearth something in time. As they pulled up to the imposing stone building, Maya steeled herself for the fight of her life. Inside, the courtroom was a cavern of polished wood and muted whispers. Maya settled at the defense table, her heart thudding against her ribs. Across the room, the prosecutor, Jacob Rowan, eyed her with a predator's smug assurance, his tailored suit gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Judge Warwick loomed above them all, his gavel resting like a scepter in his hand, his face a mask of icy detachment. But as Maya met his gaze, she caught a fleeting flicker of unease in his cold eyes. It was subtle, but it fueled a spark of hope in her chest. The trial kicked off with opening statements. Rowan strode forward, his voice smooth and commanding as he painted Maya as a cunning opportunist, a bank employee who'd abused her access to siphon off funds, betraying her employers and her oaths. This is a clear-cut case, he declared, flashing partial transaction logs like trophies. Her credentials, her proximity, everything points to guilt. Maya's pulse hammered as the evidence unrolled before the jury, each line twisted to damn her. She saw it then how meticulously she'd been framed, her own log and used as a noose to hang her with. Panic clawed at her, but she forced herself to breathe. Celeste rose to counter, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. Maya Jackson has an unblemished record, she began, laying out testimonials from colleagues who swore by her integrity. No lavish spending, no hidden accounts, just a woman scraping by in a beat-up car with a bank balance hovering near empty. Does that sound like someone who stole $85,000? She gestured to the prosecution's flimsy narrative, poking holes with surgical precision. This doesn't add up because it's not the truth. Judge Warwick's eyes narrowed, his lips a thin line, but he held his tongue, watching like a hawk. Over the next few days, the prosecution paraded bank representatives to the stand, each reciting the same rehearsed tale. Maya had access, Maya had motive, Maya was guilty. Celeste tore into them on cross-examination, exposing shaky timelines and contradictions. But Warwick's gavel fell like thunder, sustaining objection after objection. Maya caught the smirk tugging at his lips whenever he silenced her defense, a smug satisfaction. That made her skin crawl. The jury was a mixed bag. Some faces softened with sympathy, others hardened under Rowan's slick charisma. Then, on the third day, a ripple of surprise swept the room as Dennis, a junior clerk from Crestview Bank, took the stand. Maya's heart leaped at the sight of him, gangly, nervous Dennis, with sweat glistening on his forehead. She remembered Rebecca, her old co-worker, mentioning his late-night calls, his jittery hints at knowing something. Was this it? Would he finally speak up? Under oath, Dennis stammered through his story. He'd flagged oddities in the bank logs. Transactions tied to Maya's credential sex up they'd happened during her lunch breaks, when she was always away from her desk. Celeste pounced. So, Mr. Dennis, you're saying Maya wasn't even at her computer when these transactions occurred? Her tone was sharp, coaxing. Dennis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Yes, that's right. But her credentials were used. Maybe she gave her password out. Or did it remotely. Celeste leaned in. Did you ever see her linger away from her desk for hours? Notice anything strange at her workstation? Dennis's eyes darted to the gallery, where Harold Whitcomb sat scribbling notes, then back to the floor. I saw Harold Whitcomb, a manager, at her desk once, but I don't know if that matters. A murmur buzzed through the courtroom, electric and alive. Maya's breath caught this was the thread she'd prayed for. Can you tell us more? Celeste pressed. But Rowan shot up. Objection, irrelevant and speculative. Warwick's gavel crashed down. Sustained. Move on. Ms. Evans. Maya's stomach plummeted, hope snuffed out by Warwick's iron grip. Dennis slunk off the stand, his shoulders hunched. A mix of relief and shame etched into his young face. Outside, as the afternoon sun beat down on the courthouse steps, Maya caught up to him. Dennis. Thank you, she said softly, her voice trembling with gratitude. I know that took guts. He wouldn't meet her eyes, kicking at a pebble. I'm sorry I couldn't say more. Whitcomb threatened me. I've got a family, a mom who's sick. I can't lose my job. His words stung. A bitter cocktail of pity and frustration swirling in Maya's gut. She wanted to shake him, to beg for more, but instead she nodded. I get it. I'm just glad you tried. As the trial hurtled toward its end, the air grew suffocating. Dennis's half-truths had been smothered, and Celeste's push for deeper bank logs was shot down by Warwick as irrelevant and time-wasting. Maya felt like a pawn in a rigged chess match, checkmate looming. But then, on the night before closing arguments, her phone buzzed. Maya. We've got something, Agent Chan's voice crackled through, brimming with barely contained excitement. We got a warrant for Harold Whitcomb's devices. The real logs they show him logging in as you, over and over, while you were clocked out. And there's more, emails between him and Warwick, plotting payoffs. Maya's knees buckled as she sank onto her couch, gripping the phone like a lifeline. Are you serious? She gasped. Chen pressed on. We're sensing with the U.S. Attorney's office. If we move fast, we might stop this trial in its tracks. Keep your phone close. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, blurring the dim room around her. The Trother Salva tone was finally within reach. That night, she and Celeste burned the midnight oil, plotting how to wield this bombshell if the FBI could ram it through in time. Maya's exhaustion gave way to a fierce resolve. She imagined Warwick's smug face crumbling, Whitcomb's lies unraveling, and the jury's eyes opening wide. Justice wasn't just a word anymore, it was a reckoning, a lesson carved in the wreckage of abused power. Whatever came next, Maya knew one thing. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a fighter, and the dawn would bring her chance to prove it. The flicker of dread in Judge Ronald Warwick's eyes was unmistakable. As he sat behind the polished bench, his once arrogant smirk replaced by a mask of grim resolve. The weight of the FBI's evidence bore down on him like an invisible noose, tightening with every passing moment. He'd spent years wielding his gavel as a weapon, bending justice to his will. But now the hunter had become the hunted. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Warwick's trembling fingers dialed Harold Whitcomb's number. His voice, usually commanding, quivered with urgency as he barked orders through the receiver. Destroy every shred of incriminating paper, every trace of their scheme, before the feds could derail their plan to bury Maya Jackson in a rigged trial. Harold, a weary man with a perpetually pinched expression, agreed without hesitation, his own panic simmering beneath his clipped responses. They settled on one final, desperate push to seal Maya's fate at tomorrow's hearing. Neither suspected that their words were already echoing in the ears of federal agents, captured on a wiretap that would soon unravel their empire of deceit. The morning sun rose reluctantly over Crestview County, casting a dull, gray light across the courthouse steps. Maya Jackson trudged toward the looming building, her shoulders hunched against the chill of uncertainty. Her heart thudded with a chaotic mix of dread and fragile hope. Dread that this day might end with her freedom stripped away. Hope that somehow, against all odds, the truth might prevail. Inside, the air hung thick with an eerie stillness, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Harold Whitcomb was nowhere to be seen, his usual swagger absent from the prosecutor's table. Judge Warwick perched at the bench, his face carved from stone, his lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. Gone was the smug curl that had taunted Maya through weeks of proceedings. In its place was a flicker of unease he couldn't quite conceal. Prosecutor Rowan, a man with sharp features and a sharper tongue, launched into his closing argument with theatrical flair. His voice boomed through the courtroom, painting Maya as a cunning mastermind, a woman who'd orchestrated a web of crime with cold precision. Each word twisted in Maya's gut like a knife, her stomach roiling as she fought to keep her composure. She cast a silent prayer toward her attorney, Celeste Morgan, a woman whose quiet strength had become Maya's lifeline. When Celeste rose to speak, the room seemed to shift. Her voice, steady and resonant, cut through Rowan's venom like a beacon. She dismantled his narrative piece by piece, her words laced with unshakable conviction. Maya had no motive. She insisted we would, a single mother scraping by on meager paychecks, risk everything for a crime she couldn't have committed. Celeste pointed to the prosecution's shaky timeline, riddled with holes, and summoned the memory of Dennis Harper's testimony. Dennis, a nervous co-worker with darting eyes and a habit of fidgeting, had reluctantly admitted that Maya's credentials were used on days she wasn't even in the building. Ladies and gentlemen, Celeste concluded, her gaze sweeping the jury with quiet power, my client is no criminal. She's a woman framed by shadows, a scapegoat for the real culprits who still lurk among us. Look to the facts, not the fiction. The jurors leaned forward, some nodding as if her words had struck a chord deep within them. Judge Warwick delivered the standard instructions for deliberation, his voice flat and mechanical. But Maya caught the glint of sweat beading on his forehead. His hands gripped the gavel a little too tightly, betraying the storm brewing beneath his stoic facade. He was unraveling, and she could feel it. Just as the bailiff prepared to lead the jury out, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a thunderous crash. A ripple of gasps swept through the spectators as federal agents stormed in, their dark suits stark against the muted tones of the room. Leading them was Agent David Chan, a man with a square jaw and an air of unshakable authority. Maya's breath caught in her chest, her pulse hammering as she gripped the edge of the table. "Apologies for the interruption, Your Honor," Chan said, his tone firm yet polite as he strode forward. "But we have federal warrants for Harold Whitcomb's arrest, along with a search and seizure order tied to this trial." Warwick's face drained of color, his knuckles whitening as he slammed the gavel down with a force that echoed like a gunshot. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "You have no right to disrupt my courtroom." Chan didn't flinch. "With all due respect, we do, Your Honor. We have evidence that Maya Jackson was framed by Harold Whitcomb and his associates, evidence you've helped bury. We also have a warrant for your arrest." The room erupted into pandemonium. Spectators shrieked. Reporters jostled for position, their pens scratching furiously against notepads. Maya's wide eyes darted between Chan and Warwick, her mind reeling as disbelief crashed over her like a tidal wave. She clutched the table harder, her nails digging into the wood, unsure whether to sob with relief or laugh at the absurdity of it all. Beside her, Celeste placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, her face alight with a triumphant glow that mirrored the hope surging in Maya's chest. "Remove these men at once," Warwick roared, his voice trembling with fury as he jabbed a finger at the bailiff. The young officer hesitated, his wide eyes flickering between the judge and the agents. Caught in a moment of paralyzing indecision, Chen raised a hand, flashing the crisp, "Official warrants." "Stand down," he said coolly. "Federal jurisdiction takes precedence. We have proof, Your Honor, proof that you've taken bribes to rig trials, forged evidence against Miss Jackson, and more. Our team has already apprehended Harold Whitcomb, who tried to bolt this morning." Warwick's gaze flicked toward the side exit, a fleeting shadow of desperation crossing his face. For a split second, it seemed he might lunge for it. But the sight of 6 agents fanning out around the room snuffed out that flicker of defiance. He surged to his feet, his voice rising to a fevered pitch. "This is slander, lies. I've upheld the law. Me rulings were just." Chan stepped closer, unflinching. "You can tell that to a federal judge. For now, you're coming with us." A stunned hush fell over the courtroom, broken only by the soft clatter of the gavel slipping from Warwick's hand. The jurors gaped, their faces a gallery of shock and confusion. Maya's heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might burst, her mind struggling to keep pace with the whirlwind unfolding before her. 2 agents flanked Warwick, guiding him down from the bench as he muttered curses under his breath, his indignation crumbling into something pitiful. Chen turned to Maya, his demeanor softening. "Miss Jackson," he said gently, "you're free to go. We have evidence that clears you completely. The U.S. Attorney's Office will dismiss all charges effective immediately." Tears spilled down Maya's cheeks, hot and unrelenting, as she clung to Celeste. Her attorney's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, a rare crack in her composed exterior. Relief flooded Maya's body, washing away the terror that had gripped her for months. Just yesterday, she'd braced herself for a prison cell. Now, the tangled web of corruption had snapped, setting her free. The jurors shuffled out, dismissed in the chaos while reporters swarmed like vultures, their cameras flashing relentlessly. Maya stammered a few words. "I'm just grateful justice was served. I'm innocent," but the weight of the moment choked her voice. She longed to scoop her daughter, Brianna, into her arms, to let the little girl's laughter drown out the echoes of this nightmare. Celeste steered her through a side corridor, away from the media's frenzy, and into the crisp March air. Maya inhaled deeply, the cold stinging her lungs as tears traced paths down her face. She tilted her head skyward, the vast blue expanse a testament to her freedom. A short distance away, Agent Chen faced a cluster of microphones, his voice steady as he detailed the conspiracy, a scheme to pin stolen funds on Maya, orchestrated by Whitcomb and abetted by Warwick's greed. The judge's bribes and obstruction of justice had propped up their house of cards until the FBI tore it down. The press clamored for Maya, but she slipped away, exhaustion tugging at her bones. She needed Brianna's warmth, the comfort of her daughter's giggles, to anchor her in this surreal new reality. Yet even as relief coursed through her, a shadow lingered, the trauma of betrayal, of facing a system warped by corruption and prejudice, wouldn't fade overnight. She'd stared into the ostracism, power abused, justice perverted and emerged alive. Her story, splashed across headlines, would soon scream of the racist judge who'd sneered at a black woman standing alone, only to be toppled by truth's unrelenting force. Maya hoped it might light a spark for others trapped in similar binds, a reminder that even the mightiest towers of corruption could crumble. In the weeks that followed, Crestview County buzzed with the fallout. Newspapers blared Maya's name alongside the scandal that gutted the local justice system. Judge Warwick, now a disgraced figure in an orange jumpsuit, awaited trial behind bars, his once imposing presence reduced to a hollow shell. Rumors swirled of a litany of charges: bribery, evidence tampering, civil rights violations. Yet a nail in the coffin of his legacy. Harold Whitcomb, caught fleeing with a suitcase stuffed with cash, faced his own reckoning: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. The men who'd strutted through life untouchable now scurried between court dates, their power stripped away by the very system they'd manipulated. Karma, it seemed, had a long memory and a heavy hand. Maya found herself thrust into a spotlight she never sought. News vans camped outside her modest apartment, their lights glaring through her windows. She turned most away, her voice soft but firm. "I just want quiet again, for Brianna's sake." Her daughter, wide-eyed and bewildered by the chaos, clung to her mother's side. Rebecca Murphy, a journalist with kind eyes and a notepad always at the ready, stopped by one afternoon. "I get it, Maya," she said, her tone warm with empathy. "But your story, it's bigger than you. It's about a system that's cracked wide open. If you ever want to share, I'll make sure it's done right." Maya hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of a coffee mug. "Let me think on it," she murmured. "Right now, I just want to breathe." Behind bars, Warwick's former allies scattered like rats from a sinking ship, desperate to dodge the fallout. Emboldened by Maya's triumph, others stepped forward, victims of his crooked rulings, their voices rising in a chorus of outrage. The FBI's evidence, meticulously gathered by Chan and his team, left no room for doubt. The lesson was stark: power, when twisted for selfish ends, invites its own destruction. For Maya, justice had prevailed, but its cost lingered in the quiet moment's nightmares. The mistrust, the scars of a battle she'd never asked to fight. Yet as she held Brianna close, watching the girl chase sunlight across their tiny living room, she knew she'd endured. And in that endurance lay a truth as old as time: no force, however mighty, could silence the human spirit forever. The air was thick with tension as each new testimony piled onto the growing heap of evidence, hammering the final nails into the coffin of Judge War's legacy, a rotting edifice, built on corruption, prejudice, and unchecked power. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the weight of every word sinking deeper into the minds of those present, exposing a man who had wielded his gavel like a tyrant's scepter. Meanwhile, miles away from the chaos of the trial, Maya Jackson sat in a dimly lit office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her was Celeste, her attorney, an unwavering ally, whose sharp eyes flickered with determination as they pored over legal documents. They were plotting a civil suit against Crestview Bank, a financial giant that had played its own role in Maya's nightmare. The thought of stepping back into the legal fray made Maya's stomach twitch. Could still feel the echoes of sleepless nights, the sting of false accusations, the suffocating walls of a detention cell closing in. But this wasn't about reliving the past for her own sake. It was bigger than that. "I'm not chasing a paycheck," Maya said, her voice steady, but laced with a quiet fire as she locked eyes with Celeste. "I want them to pay a price serial consequence so no one else has to go through what I did." Her words hung in the air, heavy with resolve. Celeste nodded, her lips curling into a faint, approving smile. She leaned forward, tapping a pen against the table. "Then we'll hit them where it hurts. We'll demand a settlement that forces a complete overhaul of their oversight system, and a deep dive into every ruling war ever made through their influence. That's how we root out the poison and make sure it doesn't spread." Maya felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, a chance not just for her own redemption, but for a system broken by greed and bias to be forced into the light. Days later, Maya found herself standing once more on the polished marble floors of Crestview Bank. This time, she wasn't alone. Celeste walked beside her, a pillar of strength in a tailored suit, her heels clicking with purpose. The moment Maya crossed the threshold, a wave of anxiety crashed over her. Her palms grew clammy, her breath hitched, and memories of humiliation clawed at her mind. The bank employees froze mid-task, their chatter dying into an eerie silence. Eyes darted toward her, some wide with shock, others narrowed in disbelief as if she were a ghost returned to haunt them. She was there to collect paperwork for the suit, but her presence felt like a thunderclap, shaking the pristine weight of their world. An older clerk, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, shuffled forward, her hands trembling slightly. Tears glistened in her eyes as she met Maya's gaze. "Miss Jackson," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I'm so sorry for everything you went through. We didn't know hit it so well." Maya's heart softened at the woman's sincerity. She managed a small, weary smile. "Thank you. It's done now." But even as she spoke, she knew the scars would linger, nights spent staring at a jail cell ceiling, the weight of war's smug, racist grin as he'd loomed over her life. Healing would be a slow climb, but freedom was hers now, and her daughter, Brianna, would grow up knowing that justice, though battered and delayed, could still find its way. The fight wasn't over yet. At a modest press conference arranged by Agent Chana Weary, soft-spoken FBI investigator with a relentless streak and supervisory special agent Grant, a broad-shouldered man whose quiet intensity commanded respect, Maya stepped up to a podium. Her knees trembled slightly, but she squared her shoulders and faced the small crowd of reporters. The microphones loomed like a forest of metal trees, and the camera flashes stung her eyes. But she pressed on. "I want to thank the FBI for never giving up," she began, her voice soft but growing stronger with each word. "I owe so much to my attorney, Celeste, for standing by me. And to anyone out there feeling crushed by injustice, don't let hope slip away. The system can feel like a mountain stacked against you. But there are people, good people will fight with you when it counts. Keep pushing forward. The room erupted in applause, a wave of sound that washed over her, lifting her spirits. Behind the scenes, she and Brianna were piecing their lives back together. Maya landed a job at a smaller financial firm, one that didn't just tolerate her past but celebrated her bravery. The media circus eventually rolled on to fresher scandals. But Maya's ordeal left ripples. Official probes sprang up, digging into how many others had been crushed under war's corrupt reign. The day the civil suit settled was a quiet triumph. Crestview Bank agreed to a multi-million-dollar payout, but more importantly, they were legally bound to audit their internal practice. A victory that felt like a crack in the armor of institutional rot. Maya sat alone in her living room that evening. The settlement papers spread across the coffee table. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel proud. She set aside a chunk of the money for Brianna's college fund, imagining her daughter's bright future untainted by the past. Another portion she donated to a civil rights nonprofit, one that tirelessly pushed for court reform. She wouldn't let the cycle of pain repeat, not while she had breath left to fight. News trickled in about Judge Warhus' desperate attempts to dodge accountability by ratting out fellow corrupt officials had fallen flat. Witness after witness took the stand, each one peeling back another layer of his arrogance, revealing a man who'd believed his robe, his race, and his cronies made him untouchable. But the law, slow as it was, had finally caught up, dragging him down from his pedestal. One radiant Sunday morning, Maya and Brianna wandered through a sprawling park, the grass soft beneath their feet. Brianna's laughter rang out as she darted ahead, her small frame weaving through patches of sunlight, free from the shadow that had once loomed over them both. Maya paused, tilting her face toward the sun. A gentle breeze brushed her cheeks, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. She closed her eyes, letting gratitude settle into her bones, not for the suffering she'd endured, but for what it had forged in her: resilience, a fierce love for her community, and an unshakable belief in the power of truth. The image of War's sneering face still flickered in her mind, but it was overshadowed now by a sharper memory. The day he'd been led away in handcuffs, his power stripped bare, unable to ruin another life with his venom. In the end, Maya Jackson stood tall, a living testament that justice, though scarred and weary, could still burn bright. Her journey was a piercing reminder that truth could cut through the thickest veils of corruption. When a racist judge, a ruthless banker, and a system designed to silence had towered over her, Maya had refused to break. She'd found unexpected champions: a tenacious journalist who'd sniffed out the story, a compassionate attorney who'd poured her soul into the case, and an FBI agent whose dogged pursuit of the truth had toppled a web of lies. Together, they'd dismantled a festering empire of bribes and bigotry, proving that a single voice, fueled by courage, could ignite a wildfire of change. Maya's story wasn't just her own, it was a beacon for anyone clawing their way out of despair. A promise that even in the darkest corners of power, light could still break through.